The wheels of the carriage were the only sound, a steady, grinding rhythm against the iron-hard ruts of the road. Clara Whitmore watched the land pass, but her eyes saw nothing. The plains of the Wyoming Territory stretched into an endless, aching gray under a sky that promised more snow but refused to give it. It was the winter of 1888, and the cold had sunk deep into the earth, deeper still into the marrow of her bones. The carriage was Alden's, heavy and black, with thick glass to blunt the wind. It was built for comfort, he had told her, but the cold found its way in, just as it found its way into the grand house that waited for her at the end of the long drive. She pulled the thick buffalo robe tighter around her lap, her gloved fingers clenching the worn leather strap by the window. Her face, reflected in the glass, was a pale oval, passive, the eyes hollow. She had been beautiful once, or so she had been told, back east. Here, the wind and the silence had scoured the color from her, leaving only the fine, brittle lines of a porcelain doll left too long on a shelf. She was returning from town, a 40-mile round trip that served no purpose other than to fetch the mail Alden insisted be retrieved twice a week, and to remind the shopkeepers and the few other women in the territory of her existence, Mrs. Alden Whitmore, wife of the cattle baron, a respectable post. The carriage hit a particularly deep rut, jarring her against the velvet-upholstered seat. The jolt sent a sharp pain through her body, but it was the echo of another jolt, years ago, that made her shut her eyes. The memory was always there, waiting beneath the surface of the long, empty days. It was not the biting Wyoming wind, but the damp, heavy air of a Philadelphia spring, rain on the cobblestones, the smell of wet wool and her father's cigar smoke in his study. He had not looked at her. He had looked at the fireplace, his hands clasped tight behind his back. "The arrangement is made," he'd said, his voice flat, stripped of all the warmth she'd once known. "You will be married." She had tried, one last time. "Father, please, it was not, I did not." "It does not matter what it was." He'd cut in, his voice like a gavel. "It matters what is said. Your reputation is ruined, mine is tarnished. This is the only way." The man, the cause of the scandal, was already forgotten. His name a poison she had been forced to swallow. He had promised love and delivered shame, a quiet, devastating social ruin that had closed every door but one. "Alden Whitmore," her father continued, turning to his desk, to his ledgers. "He is a man of considerable means. He is building an empire in the West. He requires a wife, a respectable wife, from a good family, to manage his home." "He does not know me," Clara had whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He knows what he needs to know. He knows your family." Her father had finally looked at her then, his eyes as cold and gray as the Wyoming sky outside her carriage window. "He is willing to overlook the incident in exchange for the connection. It is a business arrangement, Clara, and you will honor it." 2 weeks later, she was on a train, moving west, leaving the whispers and the pitying looks behind, traveling toward a man she had met only twice, under supervised, sterile conditions. Alden Whitmore was precisely what her father had described, a man of substance. His substance was land, thousands upon thousands of acres of it, and cattle, 10,000 head. He was handsome, in a severe, chiseled way, his dark hair already showing distinguished gray at the temples. He was respected, feared, even. His word was law in this part of the territory. And he was cold. The carriage rounded the final bend, and the main house rose from the plains. It was a monument to Alden's ambition, a 3-story Victorian monstrosity of white timber and dark green trim, a fortress of Eastern respectability dropped onto the unforgiving prairie. It had tall windows and a wide porch, but it looked, to Clara, like a prison. The driver, a ranch hand named Jeb, pulled the team to a halt. He hurried to open the door, his face wrapped in wool, his eyes avoiding hers. "Ma'am." Clara descended, her boots making no sound in the light dusting of snow on the packed earth. Alden was waiting, as he always was. Not on the porch, but in his study, just inside the heavy front door. She could see his silhouette through the window, standing by his desk. He would be checking his pocket watch. He valued punctuality. She entered the house. The air inside was still warm and smelled of lemon oil and old wood. Martha, the housekeeper and cook, a stout woman in her 50s, took her cloak without a word, her expression blank and practiced. Clara walked to the study. The door was open. Alden stood exactly as she had pictured, his black suit coat buttoned, his starched white collar perfect. He was not a tall man, but he seemed to fill the room, to suck the air from it. "You are late," he said. It was not an accusation, simply a statement of fact. "The roads are freezing. Alden, Mr. Sweeney had to slow the team. An efficient man accounts for the weather." He held out his hand. Not for her, but for the leather mail satchel. She handed it to him. His fingers brushed hers. It was like being touched by marble, cool, smooth, and lifeless. It was the only way he ever touched her. "The mail, Clara." "Yes, that is the mail." He turned from her, placing the satchel on his wide mahogany desk. He did not ask about her day. He did not ask if she was cold. He began to sort the letters, his back to her. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "Yes, Alden." She was dismissed. Clara retreated from the study, her steps quiet on the thick Persian rug. She climbed the grand, sweeping staircase to the second floor. Their bedrooms were at the front of the house. His, the master's suite, was on the right. Hers, a smaller but still generous room, was on the left. A hallway of silent, polished wood separated them. In the first weeks of their marriage, she had waited. She had worn the silk nightgowns her mother had packed, her heart a cold knot of duty and fear. She had waited for his footsteps in the hall, for the turn of her doorknob. The footsteps never came. The knob never turned. Alden Whitmore kept up appearances in all things. He had his respectable wife. He treated her with a distant, formal courtesy in front of his men, in front of the town. But in the quiet of the night, in the private spaces of their home, he did not exist. The marriage bed was cold. The silence in her bedroom was absolute, broken only by the wind rattling the glass or the distant, mournful cry of a coyote. She entered her room and closed the door. It was her sanctuary, her cell. She spent her days here, or in the library downstairs. She tended to the household chores required of her, planning menus with Martha, checking linens, ensuring the silver was polished. She managed Alden's house with the same cold efficiency he managed his ranch, but the hours were so long. She read Shakespeare and poetry, novels smuggled in the mail by a friend back east, books that spoke of passion and worlds that seemed impossible now, and she painted. In the corner of her room, by the window that faced east, stood an easel. Alden had allowed it, calling it a suitable hobby for a lady. He did not look at what she painted. She painted the land, the same bleak, gray and brown landscape she saw from the carriage, day after day. She painted the frost on the window pane, the way the light died behind the distant hills. Her paintings were technically proficient, but they were as hollow and cold as her eyes. They were paintings of a cage, by a prisoner. The house was too quiet, but the ranch was not. A week later, the quiet of the house was broken by Alden. He was in his study, his voice sharp. Clara was arranging winter roses in a vase in the main hall, a task she despised for its futility. "I will not tolerate it, Hatcher," Alden said. "Mr. Hatcher was his foreman, a decent, weathered man. Mr. Whitmore, they ain't moving. They're squatters, plain and simple, but they've dug in for the winter. Down by the river bend, they say the land ain't registered to you. All of this," Alden's voice swept up, "all of this, from the mountains to the river, is mine. I bought it, I filed it, and I will not have my borders encroached upon. They're just a few families, sir, poor dirt farmers, and there's been talk of rustlers hitting the northern range again. Rustlers and squatters," Alden snapped. "They are the same problem. They are thieves, I need a man who understands that. You are a good foreman, Hatcher, but you are soft. Sir, I am expanding the herd in the spring. I am pushing west. I need this ranch sealed. I need a man who will push back. I have hired such a man. Clara froze, her hand deep in the cold water of the vase. Hired? Hatcher's voice was tight. You hired someone over me? I hired someone under you. Hatcher, a man for the river bend. He will oversee the expansion and he will deal with the squatters, by whatever means are necessary. Who? His name is Eli Boone. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she felt a shift in the air, a cold draft, as if a door had opened somewhere. Boone, Hatcher said, his voice low. I've heard of him. He ran with McCulloch's outfit in Texas, rode in the war. Some say. I do not care what he did in the war. Alden said, I care what he will do here. He arrives today. Put him in the old trapper's cabin by the river. It's close to the problem. And Hatcher, I want him kept away from the main house. I don't want his kind mixing with the domestic staff. Or with Mrs. Whitmore. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Hatcher said, his voice heavy with defeat. Clara pulled her hand from the vase, water dripping onto the floor. She stared at the red-brown drops on the polished wood. They looked, for a moment, like blood. She met Eli Boone 3 days later. She had taken to walking in the afternoons, bundled in her heaviest cloak, simply to escape the oppressive stillness of the house. She walked toward the stables, not to ride, but to smell something alive, the sharp, earthy scent of hay and horses. Alden was there, standing by the corral. He was pointing toward the western range, his voice sharp, issuing orders. A man stood beside him, listening. Or rather, a man was working. He was digging post holes for a new length of fence Alden had demanded near the main barns. He was shirtless. It was the first thing she noticed, and it struck her with the force of a physical blow. The day was cold, the sun a weak, pale disk in the sky, but the man worked as if it were high summer. He was stripped to the waist, his skin slick with sweat, the muscles in his back and shoulders coiling and releasing as he drove the heavy post-hole digger into the frozen ground. He was dirty. Dirt was caked on his arms, streaked across his chest, smeared on his face. His hair was long, dark, and wet, tied back with a strip of leather. Alden saw her. His face tightened in disapproval. Clara, this is no place for you. Go back to the house. The man with the digger stopped. He did not turn immediately. He finished his movement, lifting the heavy tool, tamping the earth. Then, slowly, he turned. Clara's breath caught. He was not handsome, not in the way Alden was. His face was rough, carved from hard angles. A scar, thin and white, cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes, she could not see their color from this distance, but they were intense. They were not hollow. He was everything Alden was not. He was raw, wounded, and real. This, Alden said, his voice dripping with disdain, is Mr. Boone. He is the new hand. Eli Boone did not nod. He did not smile or tip a hat he did not wear. He simply looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman, not as a piece of property or a social obligation, but as a fact. His eyes swept over her, from her booted feet to her tightly wrapped scarf, and lingered on her face. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of what? She did not know. She only knew that her heart, which she had thought frozen solid, gave a painful, single thud against her ribs. Then Alden stepped between them, blocking her view. Mr. Boone understands his duties, and he understands his boundaries. Do you not, Mr. Boone? Eli Boone drove the digger into the ground, resting his hands on the wooden handle. His voice, when it came, was a low gravel, rough as the land itself. I understand the land, sir, and I understand the fence line. It was not the answer Alden wanted, but it was the one he got, furious. Alden grabbed Clara's elbow, his fingers digging in. Go to the house. She went, her back straight, her legs trembling. She did not look back, but she felt his eyes on her until she rounded the corner of the stable. Alden had given his orders. Eli Boone was to stay away from the main house. He lived in the small, one-room cabin by the river, a mile distant. He was a tool, like a shovel or a rifle, to be used and kept at a distance. But the house had needs. The domestic staff was small. Martha and 2 young girls, Beth and Anna, who helped with the cleaning and laundry. Hatcher was responsible for provisioning the outlying cabins. But Hatcher was busy on the North Range. He'll need supplies, Clara said to Martha 2 mornings later. They were in the pantry, the air cold and smelling of cured ham and dried herbs. Martha was counting cans of peaches. Mr. Hatcher usually sees to it. Mr. Hatcher's gone. The new man, Mr. Boone. He will need food, linens. Martha stopped counting. She looked at Clara, her expression unreadable. Mr. Whitmore was very clear. Ma'am, he's not to be encouraged. He is an employee, Clara said, her voice sharper than she intended. He is not an animal. He cannot work if he is not fed. I will not have it said that this house neglects its duties. Martha sighed. I'll pack a box. I'll take it, Clara said. The silence that followed was heavy. Ma'am, I don't think... It is my house. Martha, I will see to its running. An hour later, Clara was on her mare, a smaller, gentler horse than the men rode, a sturdy wooden box of supplies, bacon, coffee, flour, beans, a bar of lye soap, 2 clean blankets, strapped behind her saddle. The ride to the river cabin was cold. The path was narrow. The cabin itself was barely more than a shack, built of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud. A thin plume of smoke rose from the stone chimney. He was outside, sharpening an axe on a grinding wheel. He wore a shirt this time, a rough wool thing that had seen better days. He stopped his work when he saw her approach, his hand resting on the axe handle. He watched her, unmoving, as she dismounted. Mr. Boone. Ma'am? She untied the box, staggering under its weight. He made no move to help her. He just watched. I've brought supplies from the house, she said, her voice tight from the cold and the effort. She set the box down on the packed dirt near his porch. Wasn't expecting it. The house provides for all its men. Their interaction was awkward, brittle. She stood by her horse. He stood by his wheel. The space between them was charged with the memory of their first meeting. You should take it inside, she said, gesturing to the box. The bacon will freeze. He finally moved, walking over to the box. He was taller than she had realized. He lifted the heavy box as if it were empty. As he bent, the sleeve of his flannel shirt rode up, revealing a network of old scars on his forearm, white and puckered against his skin. War scars, she thought. He turned to take the box inside. Clara, in that moment, was just a woman, and her manners, beaten into her since childhood, took over. I can put the blankets on the shelf for you, to keep them dry. It was a mistake, an excuse. He paused, his back to her, and then kicked the door open with his boot. As you wish. She followed him in. The cabin was tiny. A cot in one corner, a cold stove in the other. A small, rickety table. It was bare and, she noted, surprisingly clean. Her blankets would be the only soft thing in it. She moved to the small shelf by the cot. She reached up to place the folded blankets. As she did, the heavy sleeve of her riding cloak fell back. Her own sleeve, the cuff of her blouse, had ridden up an inch, pushed up by her glove. On the pale, delicate skin of her inner wrist was a dark, ugly bruise, the distinct, thumb-shaped shadow and 4 finger marks of a hand that had gripped her far too hard. Alden's hand, from when he had pulled her away from the corral. She froze, her arm outstretched, suddenly aware of the silence. He was standing by the table, the box in his hands. He hadn't moved. He wasn't looking at the blankets. He was looking at her wrist. Clara snatched her hand back, pulling her cloak tight, her face burning with a shame so hot and sudden it made her dizzy. It was a different kind of shame than the one from Philadelphia. This was immediate and raw. Eli Boone said nothing. He did not ask. He did not offer sympathy. His face remained a hard mask. But his eyes had dropped from her wrist to her face, and in them, she saw a flicker of that same hard recognition from the corral. He knew. He had seen this before. He understood the mark of a brute, because he was one, or because he had lived among them. She felt exposed, stripped bare in a way that had nothing to do with her clothes. "That will be all," she said, her voice a cold, sharp echo of her husband's. She turned and fled, not walking, but rushing from the cabin. She fumbled with her horse's reins, her hands shaking so badly she could barely mount. She did not look back as she galloped away, the frozen clods of earth flying from her mare's hooves. She did not see him step onto the porch, his eyes following her until she was just a small, dark shape against the gray snow. That night, the house was more silent than ever. Alden ate his dinner with his usual, methodical pace. He spoke of ledgers, of the price of beef in Chicago, of the need to cull the weaker members of the herd before the heavy snows. Clara said nothing, pushing a piece of venison around her plate. The sight of her own wrist, the phantom grip of Alden's fingers, the memory of Eli Boone's knowing eyes, had stolen her appetite. Later, she sat at her vanity while Mary, the maid, brushed her hair. Mary was the closest thing Clara had to a confidant, but even that was a shallow pool. Mary was a widow, practical, her life defined by work. The brushing was a comfort, a simple, human touch in a world devoid of it. Clara stared at her reflection in the silvered glass. The hollow-eyed woman stared back. "Mary," she whispered, the sound shocking in the quiet room. "Ma'am?" Mary's hands paused. "This house," Clara said, her voice trembling. "It is so dreadfully quiet." Mary's eyes met Clara's in the mirror. There was a deep, bottomless sadness in the older woman's gaze, a profound and weary understanding. "Yes, ma'am," Mary said softly. "It is." Clara closed her eyes. "In my father's house, even in the depths of night, there was life. A ticking clock, the sound of the city. Here, there is nothing." Mary set the brush down. "Mr. Whitmore is a busy man, ma'am. His mind is on other things." "Yes," Clara whispered, opening her eyes. "Other things." She was alone, utterly. The silence of her bed, the emptiness of her marriage, stretched before her like the Wyoming plains, vast, cold, and without end. The storm broke 2 nights later. It came from the north, a howling monster of wind and ice that rattled the thick windows of the house and screamed down the chimney. Alden was in his study, safe behind his ledgers. Clara was in her room, unable to read, unable to paint. The silence of her bed felt like a living thing, a cold presence beside her. She rose, pulling her thick wool wrapper on over her thin cotton nightgown. She felt suffocated, choked by the still air of her room, by the safety of the house. On impulse, driven by a restlessness she couldn't name, she walked down the hall, down the grand staircase, and to the front door. She unbolted it, the click of the metal loud in the roaring quiet. She stepped out onto the wide porch. The wind hit her instantly, stealing her breath, whipping her hair and her nightgown around her legs. It was brutal, and it was alive. She grabbed one of the thick porch columns, the wood rough against her palms. The sleet stung her face, and for the first time in months, she felt real. She had left a single candle burning on the hall table, and it cast a weak, flickering rectangle of light onto the porch floor. She was a silhouette, a pale ghost against the dark, churning world. And then she saw him, a lone rider, head down, pushing his horse through the teeth of the storm. He was coming from the range, moving toward the river, toward his cabin. It was Eli Boone. He was soaked, a figure of ice and misery. His hat pulled low. He was still 30 yards from the house, on the main track. But he stopped. He stopped his horse, which stamped and tossed its head, hating the ice. He had seen the light. He had seen the movement. He looked up. She could not see his face, only a shape. He could not see hers, only her white nightgown, her hair wild in the wind. A woman standing in a storm on a rich man's porch. The world seemed to stop. The wind howled, a third presence between them. It was a moment of impossible, dangerous stillness. He, a man of the dirt and the storm. She, a woman of the house, a prisoner in the light. Tension, thick and cold, stretched between them. He should have ridden on. He was warned. She should have run inside. She was the mistress of the house. Neither moved. Then, his horse sidestepped, breaking the spell. He nudged the animal with his heels, turning its head away from the house, back toward the river. He rode on, not looking back. Clara watched him until the darkness and the swirling snow swallowed him whole. Only then did she realize her hands were numb, her nightgown soaked, her body shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the ice. She backed away, pulling the heavy door shut, bolting it against the night. But she knew, as she leaned against the wood, her heart hammering a wild, unfamiliar rhythm, that the storm was no longer just outside. It was in. The storm broke the world, and in its wake, the land was scoured clean. The silence that followed was different. Not the oppressive stillness of the house, but the vast, breathing quiet of the plains. Clara found she could no longer bear the walls of her room. The house was a tomb, and she was suffocating. She began to ride out every afternoon, a new, sharp urgency pulling her. She told Alden she was checking the winter stores in the line shacks. He did not care, so long as she was back by dusk. In her place at his table, her rides always took the same path, down toward the river. She would see him from a distance. Eli Boone. He was a constant figure of motion, always mending a fence line in the frozen air, splitting wood for the spring, or just sitting on his horse on a high ridge. Watching. He was always watching. The first few times. She rode past the track to his cabin, her head high, her gaze fixed between her mare's ears. He, in turn, never stopped his work. He never waved, never called out. He simply existed, a dark, solid shape in the gray landscape. Then, she began to pause, a quarter-mile from his cabin, where the river bent. She would rein in her mare, pretending to check a hoof or adjust her cinch, and she would look. He would be there. He would stop his work, and he would look back. The distance between them was 100 yards, 1,000. It was a gulf of snow, of class, of marriage. But in that long, shared silence, something was exchanged. He did not approach. She did not wave. It was a strange, silent truce. One afternoon, she found herself not painting, but sketching. Her heavy landscapes felt false. She took a sheet of drawing paper and a stick of charcoal, and in quick, sharp lines, she drew the river bend. She drew the small, rough cabin, the plume of smoke rising from the chimney, the way the bare cottonwoods clawed at the sky. It was not a painting. It was a truth. The next day, she rode out with the paper rolled and tucked inside her cloak, her heart hammered against her ribs. A wild bird in a cage. He was gone, his horse not at the rail. He was likely checking the southern traps. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the snow. The cabin was silent. She walked to the door, her courage failing. This was a line, a boundary. Alden's warning echoed in her head. Stay away from the main house. This was the reverse, and 1,000 times more dangerous. She could not knock. She could not enter. Instead, she wedged the rolled sketch into the chinking of the cabin wall, a small white scroll against the dark, rough wood. Then she turned, fled to her horse, and galloped back to the house, her face hot with shame and a strange, thrilling fear. For 2 days, she did not ride. She paced her room, a prisoner once more, certain she had made a terrible mistake. On the 3rd day, she could bear it no longer. She rode. She approached the cabin slowly. The sketch was gone. She felt a wave of cold disappointment. He had thrown it in the fire. Most likely. A foolish, childish gesture. She was about to turn her mare when she saw it. Tucked into the very same spot in the chinking was a new object. She slipped from the saddle. It was a small piece of cottonwood bark, pale and smooth. He had carved it with a rough knife. He had shaped it into a bird in flight, its wings spread wide. It was not delicate. It was simple, strong, and it was alive. Clara closed her gloved hand around it. The rough edges of the wood bit into her palm. She stood there for a long time, just holding it, the cold wind whipping her hair. The carving broke the ice. The next day, he was there, splitting logs. He did not stop when she approached, but he slowed. She reined in her mare, just at the edge of the clearing. "Mr. Boone." Her voice was thin, carried away by the wind. He stopped, his axe resting on the log. "Ma'am." "The carving," she said, touching the pocket of her cloak where it now lived. "It is very good." He looked at the ground, then back at her. "The sketch was good. You caught the bend in the river." It was the first praise she had received in years. It warmed her more than her heavy cloak. "The snow will hold," he said, nodding at the sky. "You think so?" "I do. The air is too cold to drop it." That was all. She nodded, a tight, formal gesture, and rode on. But a thread had been spun, connecting the grand house to the small cabin. Their conversations grew slowly, painfully. Small words, exchanged at a distance of 20 yards. He told her where the ice was thin. She told him the news from the Chicago paper that Alden received. He warned her a coyote pack was running hungry. She just listened. She listened to the sound of his voice, a low gravel that was, for all its roughness, the only gentle sound in her world. The small exchanges became a ritual, a necessary part of her day. And then, one afternoon, the ritual broke. Her saddle had been feeling wrong for days. It shifted, slipping to the side, no matter how tightly Jeb cinched it for her. Alden's horse, Alden's saddle, everything was his. She was riding back, near the stables, when Eli appeared. He was returning a team of draft horses to the corral. He saw her, saw the way she was leaning to one side, compensating. He stepped in front of her mare, and the horse stopped. "Ma'am, you're favoring your left. You'll lame her." "It is the saddle," Clara said, frustrated, her cheeks flushing. "It keeps slipping." Alden was in town, gone to Cheyenne for 2 days. The ranch felt, for a moment, like hers. Eli put a hand on the saddle, testing it. "Get down." It was a command, not a request. She obeyed, sliding to the ground. He examined the rigging. "This strap," he said, his voice tight with anger. "It's dry-rotted. It's about to break. He." And she knew he meant Alden, or at least his foreman. "He's trying to get you killed?" "No," she said, shocked. "It's just old." "It's neglect." He pulled a knife from his belt. "I'll fix it, but I need my tools." "They are in the stable." "No, mine are in my cabin. I'll fetch them." I will wait here. The wind is picking up. You'll wait in the stable." Again, she obeyed. She led her mare into the cavernous stable, the air thick with the smell of hay and horse. He was back in less than half an hour, his horse breathing hard. He had not just brought his tools, he had brought his entire leather-working kit. He set to work, cutting away the rotted strap, his hands, which she had only seen dirty or clenched, now moving with a surprising, swift grace. He cut a new strap from a piece of thick, oiled hide. He used an awl, his needle, and waxed thread. She stood and watched, her back to the stall. "You should hold this," he said, not looking up. He gestured to the saddle flap. Clara stepped forward, her heart thudding. She put her gloved hand on the cold, smooth leather. He began to stitch, his movement strong and sure. His large, rough hand worked next to hers. He pulled the last stitch taut, his knuckles brushing the leather of her glove. And then his hand stilled. His forefinger, calloused and stained, grazed the back of her hand, just above the glove, on the pale, exposed skin of her wrist. It was not a caress. It was a brand, a jolt, hot and sharp. Shot up her arm. She gasped, a small, choked sound. She did not pull away. She trembled, a violent, bone-deep shiver that shook her whole frame. Eli froze. He looked at her hand. At the single point of contact, he looked at her face, her eyes wide, her lips parted. He saw the tremor. He felt it. She snatched her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. "The cold," she lied, her voice a whisper. "I am just cold." Eli's face was a mask of stone. He packed his tools, his movements deliberate. "It will hold now. Ma'am, it won't break." "Thank you," she stammered. He nodded, shouldered his kit, and walked out of the stable without another word. She leaned against the stall, her legs too weak to hold her. She ripped off her glove and stared at her wrist. There was no mark, but it burned. It burned. That night, she stood in her room, the silence of the house pressing in. She unbuttoned her dress, her movements mechanical. She stared at her reflection in the tall mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, pale and haunted. She thought of that touch, that single, accidental grazing of his skin on hers. It was more real, more charged with life than anything she had felt in her marriage. She thought of Alden, in his room down the hall, or perhaps in his study, with his books. A man who owned her, but did not want her. She touched her own face, her own throat. "My husband doesn't touch me," she whispered to the woman in the glass. The words, spoken aloud, were a judgment. They were a confession of a profound, wasting hunger. She was starving, and she had just been offered a single, stolen crumb of bread. She sank onto the small bench, her head in her hands. Alden returned from Cheyenne, and the atmosphere in the house grew colder. He had not liked what he heard in the town. He was a man who prized control, and he could sense, in the way a wolf senses a change in the wind, that something was shifting. Clara was too quiet at dinner, or she was too bright. Her answers were sharp. When she rode out, there was a flush in her cheeks that was not just from the cold. He watched her from his study window, saw her take the river path. Again. 2 days later, a new man arrived at the ranch. He was not a cowboy. He was a thin, rat-faced man named Pike, who wore a bowler hat and a cheap suit. Alden introduced him as an auditor, someone to check the grain tallies and the ledgers. But Pike did not check ledgers. He sat on the porch, he walked the grounds, he haunted the stables. And wherever Clara went, she would see him, at a distance, watching her. He was a spy. Alden's leash, made flesh, the cage, which had begun to feel larger, snapped shut. Clara felt a wild, reckless panic. She was being watched. She was being herded. One afternoon, a week after Pike's arrival, she rode out. She was angry. She was careless. She pushed her mare, faster, harder, trying to outrun the feeling of Pike's cold eyes on her back. She took the low trail, the one that cut through the frozen creek bed. It was a foolish shortcut, one Eli had warned her against. The snow was thin, covering patches of sheer, black ice. She was thinking of Eli, of his hand, of the carving. She was not thinking of the ice. The mare's front hoof hit a slick patch. The horse went down, a terrible, screaming slide of animal and ice. Clara was thrown hard. She landed on her back on the frozen bank. The world went white, then black. The breath was driven from her body in a single, agonizing whoop. She lay there, stunned, the gray sky spinning. Her mare scrambled to its feet, panicked, and bolted, disappearing over the ridge. "Clara!" The voice was not in her head. Eli Boone was kneeling beside her. He was breathless, as if he had run a long way. He must have been watching. He was always watching. I, she gasped, trying to sit up. A bolt of fire shot through her side. She cried out, "Don't move," he commanded. "Where?" "My side," she whispered. "My ankle. I can't." His hands, rough and sure, ran down her leg, over her boot. "The ankle is twisted, not broken, I think." "My side," she said again, the pain making her dizzy. He looked. Her heavy wool riding jacket was bunched. Her blouse, beneath it, was torn. The buttons had ripped away. He saw them. She knew he saw them. They were not new. They were old. A constellation of faint, ugly bruises on her ribs. purple, yellow, and green. The marks left by Alden's hand, 2 weeks prior, when he had shoved her against the bedpost for questioning his purchase of a new bull. Eli's face went utterly, terrifyingly still. His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping. His eyes, dark as a frozen river, lifted from the marks on her skin to her face. He had seen the bruise on her wrist. This was something else. This was a pattern. A low, animal sound rumbled in his chest, a growl of a rage so deep and sudden it shocked her more than the pain. "Can you stand?" His voice was thick. "I don't think—" He did not wait for her to finish. He slid one arm under her back, the other under her knees, and lifted her from the ground as if she weighed nothing. Clara cried out, a small, sharp sound, and buried her face against his chest. The tears came, hot and sudden. She was not crying from the pain in her side or the throbbing of her ankle. She was crying because she was being held. Because this man's strength was not for hurting, but for saving. The scent of him, wood smoke, leather, and a faint, clean scent of lye soap filled her senses. He carried her. He did not take her to the house. He took her to his cabin. He kicked the door open. The small room was warm, a fire glowing in the stove. He crossed the floor in 2 strides and laid her, with impossible gentleness, on his own cot. He pulled the thick wool blanket from the foot of the cot and covered her, tucking it around her shoulders as if she were a child. She was sobbing now, great, gulping, silent sobs that shook her body. The shame of the fall, the shame of the bruises, the shame of her entire, empty life poured out of her. Eli did not speak. He did not say, "It will be all right." He did not coo or fuss or ask questions. He took the single wooden chair from his table and placed it by the stove, not by the bed. He turned it so his back was half to her. He sat, and he took a piece of wood from the kindling box, and he pulled his knife from its sheath. He began to carve. The only sounds in the warm, small room were the crackle of the fire, the shuk-shuk-shuk of his knife blade shaving wood, and her own quiet, desperate weeping. He was guarding her. He was not demanding she speak. He was not judging her tears. He was simply there, a solid wall between her and the world that had broken her. Slowly, the tears subsided. The pain in her side eased to a dull, burning ache. The warmth of the blanket, which smelled of him, of his life, seeped into her bones. Her eyelids grew heavy. She was safe. She slept. She woke to darkness. The cabin was warm. The fire banked, its red eye glowing. She sat up, a sharp pain in her ankle. He was not in the chair. He was on the floor, by the door, wrapped in a thin horse blanket, his head resting on his saddle. He was asleep, or pretending to be. He had given her his bed. The panic was immediate. "Alden, Pike, the house." "I have to go," she whispered, her voice He was on his feet in one silent motion. "It's near dawn. I must go back." "Your ankle." "I don't care." He nodded. He helped her stand. She leaned on him, her arm over his shoulder, his arm a band of iron around her waist. The contact was purely functional, and it set her skin on fire. He helped her outside. Her mare was there, in the small lean-to, brushed and fed. He had retrieved her. He lifted her, his hand strong on her waist, and set her in the saddle. She looked down at him in the gray, pre-dawn light. His face was unreadable. "Eli," she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you." "Ride the ridge," he said, his voice rough. "Don't take the main road. Pike is watching the house." He slapped the mare's flank. She rode, her body screaming, her heart a tangled knot. She slipped into the house through the kitchen door before Martha was awake. She limped up the back stairs to her room, a ghost in her own home. She fell onto her bed, safe, and she touched her throat, her locket, the small, gold her mother's locket. It was gone. It was on the floor of his cabin. Eli stood in the center of the small room. The air was thick with her scent, lavender and fear. He saw the glint of gold on the rough floorboards by the cot. He picked it up. It was heavy, and still held the warmth of her skin. He opened the clasp. Inside, there were no pictures, just two empty, oval frames. He closed his fist around it, the sharp edges of the locket digging into his palm. This was not a piece of carved bark. This was a piece of her, a piece of Alden Whitmore's world. He stood for a long time, the locket in his hand, his duty warring with the rage and the strange, terrible tenderness he felt for the woman with the bruised ribs. This was a line, and he knew, as he stared at the gold in his hand, that he had already crossed it. A place does not forget. A patch of ice, a cold floor, a warm cot. The land holds the memory. For Clara, the memory of that day was fire, the fire of pain in her ankle, the fire of shame from her torn blouse, the fire of his eyes on her bruises, and the fire of the cot, the warmth of his blanket, the impossible safety she felt in that rough, small cabin. She healed, or she pretended to. She stayed in her room for 2 days, claiming the fall had been worse than she thought. She limped when she walked. This, at least, was not a lie. Alden ignored her, his time consumed by his ledgers and the reports from the rat-faced man. Pike, but the ranch hands talked. A bunkhouse is a world of its own, built on tobacco smoke, sweat, and shared silence. But silence, when it breaks, breaks loud. They had seen it. They had seen her mare, riderless, gallop back to the stables. They had seen Eli Boone, on foot, running toward the creek bed. They had seen him, hours later, emerge from his cabin to retrieve the horse. And they had seen the mare, safe in the lean-to, long before Mrs. Whitmore, looking pale and haunted, limped back to the big house just before dawn. Pike, the man in the bowler hat, did not need to fan the flames. He only needed to listen. The whispers started in the cold of the stable, moved to the warmth of the cook shack, and settled deep in the bunkhouse. The men, rough men who lived by a hard code, were divided. Some saw a bored wife looking for trouble. Others, who had seen Alden Whitmore's cold, possessive pride, saw something else. They had seen the new hand. Boone, a man who kept to himself, a man with the war in his eyes. And they had seen the lady of the house, a pale ghost, riding the river path. The rumors swirled, but they never touched her. Not directly. They were a change in the air, a tension in the way the hands looked at her when she passed, a new, bold curiosity, or a new, sudden inability to meet her gaze. Clara felt it. She felt it in the way Martha, the housekeeper, now spoke to her with a brittle, clipped efficiency, her eyes hard, and she felt the absence of the locket. It was a cold, empty space above her heart. She had worn it every day since her mother died. Now it was gone. It was in his cabin, on his table, or in his pocket. A piece of her, left behind, a piece of gold that bound her to him, more surely than any thread. She had to get it back, but Alden was home, and Pike was watching. The tension in the house grew thick, a winter fog that choked the air. Alden was restless. He paced his study. His orders to the men were sharper. He was a man tightening his grip. He summoned her 2 nights after her return. She went to his study, her limp a real, aching throb. The room was dark, save for the single green-shaded lamp on his desk. He was not at his desk. He was standing by the fireplace, the flames casting his shadow tall and monstrous on the wall. "Your ankle is better," he stated. "It is healing. Alden, you have been careless." She stood by the door, her hand on the cold brass knob. "The mare slipped on the ice. So I am told." He turned to her, his face half in shadow. "You are told to ride the main roads. You ride the creek bed. You are told to avoid the river cabins. You ride the river path. Your choices reflect poorly on me." I was not thinking." "No," he said, his voice a silken, dangerous thread. You are not thinking of your station. You are not thinking of your duty. You are not thinking of your husband." He stepped out of the shadow. In his hand, he held something, a small black box. "Your mother's pearls," he said, "the ones from the wedding. You have not worn them in months. You will wear them for the dinner tomorrow night. The investors from Cheyenne are arriving. Of course. Alden. He stepped closer. His eyes dropped to her throat, to the high collar of her dress. You have also not worn your locket. Clara's blood turned to ice. She could not breathe. Her hand flew to her collarbone, to the empty place. It must be in my jewelry box. No, he said, his voice terribly quiet. It is not. I had Mary check. I have checked. He was standing in front of her now, close enough for her to smell the faint, bitter scent of his cigar. Where is it? Clara? I must have lost it. On the ride. When I fell. You lost it. His lip curled. You, who are so meticulous. You, who keep my house in perfect, sterile order. You lost your mother's locket. Yes. Or perhaps, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You gave it away, as a token, a payment, like a common— No, she cried. The word ripped from her. I did not. I would never. Impropriety, he hissed. It follows you, does it not? From Philadelphia to here. You carry the stain on you. He raised his hand. She saw it coming, but she did not believe it. Not Alden, not the man of appearances, the man of cold, hard control. His open palm cracked across her cheek. The sound was sharp, louder than a gunshot in the silent house. It threw her head back, her body slamming against the heavy oak door. For a second, there was no pain, only a bright, white light and a high, ringing sound. Then the fire bloomed, a sick, hot agony that spread from her cheekbone to her ear, to her lip. She tasted salt and copper, blood. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her hand rising to her face. Alden did not look enraged. He looked satisfied. He looked at his hand, then at her. You are my wife, he said, his voice flat, as if closing a ledger. You will not shame me. You will go to your room. You will find your composure. And you will be at dinner tomorrow. With the pearls. Do you understand me? She did not answer. She could not. She fumbled for the doorknob, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. She ripped the door open and ran. She ran, stumbling, her ankles screaming, her cheek a mask of fire. She ran past the staircase, past the kitchen where she heard Martha drop a pot with a loud clang. She ran out the front door, into the biting, black cold of the night. She did not grab her cloak. She ran in her thin house dress. She ran, not to her room, not to the house. She ran to the only place she had ever felt safe, the stables. The air was thick with the warm, sleeping scent of horses and hay. It was dark, the moon a sliver. She ran to the deepest, darkest corner, to an empty stall, and she fell. She curled into the loose hay, her body a single knot of pain. The tears came, but they were not like the tears in his cabin. Those were tears of release. These were tears of acid, of an animal, trapped, wounded, and dying. She sobbed, her body racked with shudders, stuffing her fist into her mouth to muffle the sound. She did not know how long she lay there. Minutes, an hour. Then, a sound, the soft crunch of a boot on the hay-strewn floor. She froze. A new, sharper terror seized her. Alden. He had followed her. A shape blocked the dim light of the stable door. It was too tall, too broad. The shape moved toward her, slowly. Clara? The voice was a low gravel. Eli. She uncurled, pushing herself back against the rough wood of the stall, her eyes wide with panic. Go, she whispered, her voice a raw croak. Go away. You cannot be here. He will kill you. He stepped into the stall. The moonlight from the high window caught his face. He looked, not at her, but at her. His eyes scanned her, her thin dress, her bare arms, the way she was shaking, and then his gaze settled on her face, on her cheek. She saw his body go rigid, his hands at his sides, clenched into fists so tight the knuckles went white. He had been holding something. He dropped it, the locket. It landed in the hay, the gold glinting. He had come to return it. He said nothing. He did not ask what happened. He knew the bruise on her wrist, the bruises on her ribs, and now this, the final proof. He took a step toward her. She flinched, a violent, involuntary recoil, scrambling back, her hands up. That single terrified movement broke him. The rage in his face dissolved, replaced by a look of such profound, wrenching pain that it stopped her breath. He had seen it. She, who had not flinched from his touch in the stable, was now flinching from him. I, he started, his voice rough. He stopped. He knelt, slowly, in the hay, as one would approach a terrified horse. He did not reach for her. He just knelt, 2 feet away, putting himself below her. He waited. Her sobbing quieted. There was only the sound of the horse's breathing, and her own ragged gasps. He lifted one hand. Slowly, he did not move to touch her face, her body. He moved, his calloused, rough fingers moving with infinite care, to a strand of her hair that had stuck to the tears on her cheek. He gently, so gently, brushed it back, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was not a brand. It was not a jolt. It was a comfort. It was the first purely gentle thing she had felt in years. She did not flinch. She leaned into the touch, a small, desperate movement, as a plant leans toward a sliver of light, and then she broke. "Don't go," she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. He started to pull his hand back, to retreat, to give her space, and she panicked. She grabbed his wrist, her fingers digging in. "Don't, please, don't go." He looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at her face, her eyes pleading, her lips split and bleeding. He leaned in. It was not a decision. It was an answer. He kissed her. It was the slowest, most hesitant kiss in the world. His lips, rough and dry, brushed hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of pain. It tasted of her blood, her tears, and the salt of his own impossible yearning. Her body was trembling, a leaf in a storm. He kissed the corner of her mouth, where she was not split. He kissed her cheek, high on the bone, away from the bruise. And then he pulled back. His face was a mask of conflict. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with 1,000 broken laws. "We cannot. This is—" She did not let him finish. She had been passive. She had been a doll, a prisoner, an object. She had been struck, and she had run. She had been found, and she had pleaded. Now, she acted. She pulled him by the front of his rough wool shirt. She pulled him with all the strength of her desperate, starving life. She closed the distance, and she put her mouth on his. This kiss was not slow. It was not gentle. It was a drowning. It was a fire. It was all the words she could not say, all the hunger she had hidden, all the rage she had swallowed. She kissed him with a lifetime of silence, and he, after a moment of stunned resistance, kissed her back. He kissed her with the same desperate force. His hand, the one she was not holding, came up to her jaw, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady, as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. It was not enough. The cold, the floor, the fear. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing like they'd run a mile. "Not here," he growled. He stood, pulling her to her feet. She stumbled, her ankle giving way. He caught her, sweeping her into his arms, just as he had at the creek. But this was not a rescue. This was a conspiracy. He carried her to the ladder at the end of the stable. He climbed, one-handed, her arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. The loft. It was warm, the air thick with the sweet, dry smell of a summer's worth of hay. The moonlight streamed in through the high loft door, painting the floor in silver. He did not set her down. He walked to the deepest, softest pile of hay and sank to his knees, laying her down as if she were made of glass. They stared at each other. The world had tilted. There was no house, no Alden, no rumors. There was only this space, this silver light, and the two of them. He touched her face, his thumb gently tracing the swelling line of her cheek. A single, hot tear of rage escaped his eye. He brushed it away, angry. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar through his eyebrow. There were no words. Words were for the world outside. Words were lies. He began to unbutton her dress. His hands, so rough, fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons. He was shaking. She didn't help him. She let him. She needed to feel him choose. He unlaced her corset, the thing she hated, the cage within the cage. He pulled it away, tossing it into the darkness. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first full breath she had taken all night. He eased the dress and her chemise from her shoulders, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked at her bruises, the old, faded ones on her ribs, and the new, terrible one on her cheek. He did not look away. He looked at them, and then he kissed them. He kissed the yellowing mark on her ribcage, a soft, warm prayer. He kissed her shoulder. She was trembling, but not from cold, from fear, from need. She reached for him, for the buttons on his shirt. Her fingers were clumsy. He helped her, tearing the rough fabric open. His skin, hot, scarred, alive. She laid her hands on his chest, on the solid, real warmth of him, and she wept, softly. He held her, just held her, stroking her hair. "I am here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am here." They lay in the hay, skin to skin. He explored her body, not with the hungry fumbling of a boy, but with the slow, reverent hands of a man who had forgotten what such softness felt like. He learned the lines of her ribs, her hips, the scar on her knee from a childhood fall. And she, in turn, learned him. The hard, coiled muscle of his arms, the map of scars on his back, the way he shuddered when she touched the place just under his jaw. It was slow, and then it was urgent. It was desperate. It was a claiming. When he finally moved inside her, she cried out, a sharp, sudden sound. It was not pain. It was release. It was the breaking of the dam. It was the sound of a life, held back for so long, finally, being touched. He held her through it, his movement strong and deep and sure. He held her as if he was anchoring her to the earth. He muffled his own release against her neck, his body seizing in a way that was its own form of violence, its own kind of surrender. They lay, tangled in the hay, for a long time. The world was gone. There was only the sound of their breathing, the smell of hay and sweat, and the moonlight. It had changed. Everything. Before the first gray light touched the sky, she stirred. He was awake. He had been watching her. She pulled her dress on, her hands shaking. She could not find her corset. She did not care. She stood. She looked at him, his bare chest, his face in the gray light. He looked ruined and beautiful. "Clara," he started. "Don't," she whispered. "No words. Not yet." She climbed down the ladder, her body aching, every muscle alive and screaming. She was shaken. Her cheek throbbed. Her ankle was fire. But she was alive. She had been a ghost in a cold house. Now, as she slipped through the gray dawn, the frozen air biting her lungs, she was a living, breathing, hurting woman. She was alive in a way she had not been in years. Eli watched her go from the loft door. He watched her small, limping figure disappear into the main house. He sank back into the hay. He saw her locket, glinting where he had dropped it. He picked it up. He smelled her on his skin. In the hay. He had broken every rule. He had put a noose around both their necks. He had not saved her. He had damned her. He knew what men like Alden did to things that defied them. He had to leave. He had to draw the fire away from her. He would be gone by noon. He would leave He would take the locket. He would take it so Alden could not find it. He climbed down. He walked, not to his cabin, but to the breaking pen. He needed to feel something break, something other than his own heart. Clara made it to her room. She locked the door from the inside, her body sliding down the wood. She was a ruin, and she was, for the first time, free. She knew what she had to do. She waited until she heard Alden leave for the morning, his voice sharp in the yard. Then she walked, not limping, though it hurt, straight to Eli's cabin. He was there, rolling his thin blanket, His saddlebags were packed. "You're leaving," she said. It was not a question. "I am," he said, not looking at her. "It's for the best. For me." "It is." "You are a fool," she said, her voice shaking, but strong. "Do you think he will stop? Do you think you, leaving, will make him kind? It will take his eyes off you. He'll hunt me." "And what of me?" she cried. "What am I then? The prize you leave behind?" He turned, his face agonized. "Clara, what else can I do? I have signed your death warrant." "No," she said, stepping toward him. She took his face in her hands. "You have signed my life. I will not stay here. Eli, I will not be his property, to lock away." She took a deep breath. "I will find a way to leave him. I will go to the judge, in Cheyenne. I will—" He stopped her, his hands gentle on her arms. His face was filled with a terrible sadness. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "This is not Philadelphia. There is no judge who will listen to a wife against a man like Alden. Not here. The law is his. This is the West. And men like Alden, they do not lose. They do not let go. They just hold on. Tighter." He was warning her. He was telling her the truth. There was no escape. "So what?" she said, her eyes blazing. "We do nothing? You run? I stay, and I don't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know." "Clara." The voice was not his. It was Martha's, cold, hard. She was standing at the cabin door, her face a mask of disapproval. Behind her, Pike, the man in the bowler hat, smiled. "Mr. Whitmore," Martha said, her voice loud enough to carry to the big house, "requests your presence. He is most insistent." Pike's smile widened. He had seen it all. He had seen her walk to the cabin. He had heard every word. Clara's blood ran cold. The trap. She walked past Martha, her head high. Eli stepped out onto the porch, his hand on his knife. "I wouldn't, Mr. Boone," Pike said, his voice oily. "The master is waiting for his wife." Clara walked across the frozen yard, every step a hammer blow. She walked into the house. Alden was in the foyer. He was calm. He was buttoning his heavy wool coat. "You are unwell, my dear," he said, his voice booming for the benefit of the staff. "The fall has affected your mind. You are overwrought." "Alden," she said, her voice low, "do not do this." "Martha," Alden said, pulling on his gloves, "Mrs. Whitmore will be confined to her room, to rest. She is not to be disturbed. She is not to leave." "Yes, sir." Martha and Beth, their faces pale and frightened, took her arms. She did not resist. It was useless. She was escorted up the grand staircase. She looked back. Once. Alden was watching her, his face a cold, satisfied mask. They put her in her room. She heard the key turn in the lock. From the outside, she ran to the window. She looked down on the yard. Alden was walking toward the stables, Pike at his side. They were walking toward Eli. The key turned in the lock, a sound as final as a spade of dirt on a coffin, from her window. Clara watched. She saw Alden, his face a mask of cold fury. Stride from the house. He was not alone. Pike, the rat-faced man, was with him, as was Brody, a hard, brutal man who ran the breaking pens. Eli was outside his cabin. His saddlebags were on the ground. He was leaving. He had been leaving. She could not hear the words, but she could read the violence in Alden's stance. Alden spoke. Eli stood straight, unmoving. He did not bow. He did not beg. She saw Alden gesture, a sharp, dismissive wave. He was firing him. Eli said something, his voice a low rumble she could feel even through the glass. Alden's back went rigid. Pike and Brody stepped forward. Eli's hand moved, but not to a gun. He held his hands open, at his sides. He would not fight, not here, not where she could be blamed for it. Alden said one last thing, then turned, his shoulders set, and walked back to the house. He was coming back for his meeting. Pike and Brody remained. Pike said something, then spat on the ground. Brody shoved Eli. Eli stumbled, but caught his balance. He turned, and they began to walk, herding him, pushing him toward the river. Clara sank to the floor, her hands clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She was a prisoner, watching a man be marched to his execution. She stayed at that window as the hours turned to lead. The investors arrived, their carriages heavy and black. She heard their voices, deep and booming, from the parlor. She heard Alden's voice, smooth, offering brandy, talking of cattle prices. The sun bled out of the sky. The world went cold and dark. Martha brought a tray. Clara did not answer the knock. Martha used her own key, saw Clara on the floor by the window, and set the tray down. "You are to eat, ma'am," Martha said, her voice flat. "He will kill him," Clara whispered. Martha's face was stone. "Mr. Whitmore is entertaining. He is a busy man." She turned and left, locking the door behind her. The hours dragged. 8 o'clock, 9. The sounds from downstairs grew louder, laughter laced with brandy. Then a sound, so soft, it was almost nothing. A scratch, a mouse, a scratch, at her door. "Ma'am," a boy's whisper. Tim, the young stable hand, not yet 16, the one who had always looked at her with a kind of sad, respectful pity. Clara scrambled to the door. "Tim," she whispered, her mouth against the wood. "Ma'am, they done it. I think they killed him." The floor fell away. "What?" "Brody," Tim whispered, his voice shaking. "He's in the bunkhouse. He's drunk, bragging. Him and Pike. They took Mr. Boone to the North Gully. They used a fence post. They said he wouldn't be bothering no one again. They left him in the mud. Is he—" She could not say the word. I don't know, ma'am. Brody said the coyotes would clean it up." A rage, cold and pure, burned through her. "Where's the key?" "Ma'am, it's in the door. I can't—" "Tim," she said, her voice iron. "Find another key, now. Ma'am, now, Tim, or I will break this window and scream." A pause, frantic shuffling. I got one. Martha's, from the ring by the kitchen. It might work." A metallic scrape. The lock clicked, loud as a shot in the quiet hall. The door opened a crack. Tim stood there, his face white as a sheet. "Mr. Whitmore is in the study. They're all in there." He breathed. "Get my cloak," she ordered, pointing to the hall stand. "And a lantern." "Ma'am, I can't. If they catch me, get them." He ran. She slipped out, her stockinged feet silent on the wood. She went to the kitchen. She stole a bottle of Alden's medicinal brandy. She stole a knife. She stole a tin of Martha's healing salve. She ripped a clean linen sheet into strips. She was no longer Mrs. Whitmore. She was a thief. Tim met her at the back door. He had her cloak, the lantern, and a thick horse blanket. I'm coming with you," he said, his voice a squeak. "No, you will stay here. You will watch. If they move from that study, you will run to the bunkhouse and yell fire. Do you understand?" He nodded, his eyes wide with terror and a new, strange admiration. She ran through the frozen yard, the unlit lantern in one hand, her cloak clutched tight. The North Gully was a mile away. The cold air burned her lungs. Her ankle throbbed, a dull memory of her last fall. She found him by the smell of blood. He was a heap of mud and torn cloth at the bottom of the gully, half submerged in a freezing, muddy creek. "Eli." She lit the lantern, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 matches. The light fell on him. He was a ruin. His face was a swollen, bloody mask. One eye was closed. His shirt was torn, his chest a canvas of dark, spreading bruises. He was not moving. "No," she whispered. "No, you will not." She dropped into the mud, pulling his head from the water. "Eli." She shook him. A groan, a low, terrible animal sound. He was alive, Clara, he breathed, the name a bubble of blood and air. Run! I'm not leaving you, she said, the words a vow. She tried to lift him. It was impossible. He was a dead weight, and she was small. Tim! She screamed, in desperation, a sound of scrambling. Tim, who had not obeyed, who had followed her, slid down the gully wall. I brought a wheelbarrow. It's on the ridge. It took them half an hour. It was a lifetime of agony. Eli groaned with every jolt, every lift. They hauled him, dragged him, lifted him. They got him into the barrow, a broken doll. Not the house. Clara panted, her hair stuck to her face with sweat and mud. Not the cabin. The old woodshed, Tim said, his voice suddenly steady. Behind the bunkhouse. It's empty. Just old tools. No one goes there. They pushed him. Tim pulling, Clara pushing, through the night. They were two ghosts, committing high treason. The woodshed was small, cold, and smelled of sawdust and rust. They laid him on the horse blanket in the driest corner. Go, Clara told Tim. Get back before you are missed. Bring me water in the morning, and food, if you can. Yes, ma'am, he said. He was a boy, but he was a man now. He vanished into the night. Clara lit the lantern. She looked at Eli, and she began to work. She cut away his bloody shirt. His ribs were a landscape of purple and black. Some were clearly broken, pushed at odd angles. She washed his face, her hands gentle. The gash over his eye was deep. She poured the brandy, Alden's brandy, onto the wound. He screamed, a high, strangled sound, and arched off the floor, his body rigid. Then he collapsed, unconscious. Good, she whispered. She tore the linen strips. She bound his ribs, pulling the strips tight enough to hold him. She cleaned his cuts. She covered his face in salve. She covered him with her own heavy cloak. She sat, her back against the rough wood, the knife in her lap, and she watched him as the lantern burned low. Their time became a secret, a stolen, sacred, whispered thing. For 3 days, he was in a fever. He was not in the woodshed. He was in the war. He was in the mud of a place called Shiloh. Stay down, Jimmy, he'd mutter, his hand grabbing at the empty air. Stay down. Clara would hold his hand, her own cold, and wipe his brow with a damp rag Tim had brought. It's all my fault, he groaned, his head thrashing. My brother, he was just a boy, younger than... I know, Clara whispered, though she did not. Hush, you are safe. The shell, I was supposed to... I couldn't find his hand. I failed. I failed to save them. She held him while he wept for his brother, for his family, for a loss so deep it had carved him from the inside out. She, in turn, was a ghost. By day, she returned to her room, Tim letting her in before dawn. She was the sick, grieving wife. She locked the door from the inside. Martha left trays. She dumped the food out the window. Alden came to her door. Clara, this performance is over. Open this door. She would lie on her bed, silent, unmoving. Clara, he would roar. She would not answer. Let him break it down. Let him show his hand. He never did. He was a man of appearances. He could not be seen to strike his wife or break down her door. Not with investors in the house. At night, she would slip back to the woodshed. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She was wiping his face. His one good eye opened. It was clear. You are a damn fool, Clara, he whispered. His voice was a raw rasp. She sobbed, a single, choked sound. You are awake. He'll kill you for this. He'll kill us both. He is trying, she said, her voice hard. I am locked in my room. How? Tim, and I am a better thief than I thought. He looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was thin, her eyes huge and dark. She was not the pale, passive woman from the carriage. She was a warrior. Why? He breathed. Because, she said. You did not flinch. Because I am so tired of being alone. She told him, as the new snow began to fall, muffling the world. She told him about Philadelphia. He was a professor, she said, her voice flat, staring at the lantern flame. He read me poetry. He told me I had a mind, not just a face. He was everything Alden is not. He was a lie. She told him about the scandal, the whispers, the ruin. He said I encouraged him. He was married. His wife, she called me a harlot in the street. And your father, Eli's voice was rough. He could not bear the shame. His name, that was all that mattered. So he made an arrangement. Alden needed a wife, a respectable wife from a good family. I needed to disappear. Alden bought me, Eli, like a broodmare. He knew I was soiled, as he put it. That is why he does not touch me. I am damaged goods, just for display. Eli was silent for a long time. He reached out, his hands shaking, and touched her cheek. Not the bruised one from the loft, his own cheek. He is the one who's soiled. Eli whispered, his voice thick with a cold, pure hatred. Not you. The snow fell. It fell for 2 days, thick and heavy, sealing them in. The ranch was quiet, the men confined to the bunkhouse. The tension was a suffocating blanket. Alden knew. He did not know where, but he knew. He knew she was not in her room. He had finally broken the lock, his patience gone. He had found the room empty, the window cold, the food scattered for the birds. Pike had found the tracks, before the new snow covered them. Tracks from the house to the woodshed. All DR was planning. He was a man of business. He would not have a public scandal. He would not have a wife who ran, a hand who stole. He would have a tragedy, a fire, an accident. He would be a grieving widower. Eli was stronger. He could sit, his back against the wall. He had been listening, at the cracks, to the sounds of the ranch. He knows, Eli said. The quiet. It's too quiet. What do we do? Eli reached into the folds of the horse blanket. He pulled out his revolver, the small Colt, which Tim had saved along with his other things. He will come for you, Eli said. He will not send Brody this time. He will do it himself. He held the gun out to her. But first, I cannot, she whispered. Her hands trembled. Yes, he said, his voice cold, hard, the voice of Shiloh. You must. He placed the cold, heavy steel in her hand. This is not a toy. This is not for show. You do not wave it. You do not warn. He took her hand, turning it, showing her. The hammer, the trigger. It is simple. You point at his chest, and you pull the trigger. You pull it, again and again, until it is empty. Do you understand me, Clara? She trembled, the weight of the metal. I am not a killer. He is, Eli said, his voice flat. And he is counting on you not being one. You must listen. You are not killing a man. You are saving your life. You are saving you. She looked at the gun. She looked at his bruised, broken, earnest face. She closed her fingers around the grip. She listened. That night, the fear and the intimacy, the shared confessions, the closeness of death, it was too much. They were two people in a tomb, and they were the only living things in it. He reached for her. I should not. Do not, she whispered. Do not treat me like I am glass. I am not any more. She moved to him, on the blankets. It was not the fire of the loft. It was something deeper, quieter, and more desperate. It was a promise, a clinging. He was still weak, his ribs on fire. He was gentle, so gentle. She held him, her skin against his against hers. And in the cold, dark, sawdust-scented air, she began to cry. He froze. Clara, I hurt you. No, she wept, her tears falling hot on his chest. No, it is not pain. She buried her face in his neck, her voice muffled. It is just, in my whole life, this is the first time I have ever felt safe. He held her then, his one good arm wrapped around her, his own eyes burning, and he did not say a word. They had a plan. The winter drive. He whispered, his lips against her hair. It is in 2 days. Alden, he is obsessed with it. All the hands. They will be on the North Range, pushing the herd. The ranch will be empty. We can take 2 horses. We ride south. We ride until we are gone. South, she said, the word a prayer. Yes. 2 days. They just had to survive for 2 more days. The snow stopped that night. The world outside was bright, clear, and cold. In the morning, they heard the ranch come alive. Voices, shouting, the clanging of the breakfast bell. It is today, Eli whispered, his body tense. The drive, he's moving it up. Clara peeked through a crack in the woodshed wall. The yard was chaos. Men were saddling horses, yelling at the cook, strapping on bedrolls, and Alden was on the porch, directing it all. He was sending every man. He is sending them all away, Clara whispered, her blood running cold. He is staying. He's clearing the board, Eli said, grabbing the revolver, checking it. He gave it to her. He wants no witnesses. They heard his boots on the snow. He was walking, not to the porch, but toward the bunkhouse, toward them. Then, a sound, a heavy thud. Clara ran to the door. She pulled the latch. It did not move. She pushed. It was solid. She heard a new sound, the scrape of wood, a heavy bar being dropped into place on new brackets. They were locked in. Clara, Alden's voice. It was smooth, calm, and conversational. He was just outside the door. Alden, she screamed, pounding on the wood. Let us out. You disappoint me. Clara, his voice came, as if he were discussing the weather. The common thievery I could overlook, stealing my brandy, my linens, but this is a pest control problem. Eli was on his feet, his back to the wall, his own knife in his hand. He was too weak to fight, but he would. Alden, you are mad. I am a man of appearances, as you know. Alden said. He sounded pleasant. A fire is such a tragedy, a terrible cleansing accident. The new hand, careless with a lantern. And my poor, sick wife, trapped. It is neat. Clara's heart stopped. She smelled it. Kerosene. She heard the slosh of the liquid, splashing against the dry wood of the shed. Alden, she shrieked, pounding. Goodbye, my dear, he said. You have been a profound and very expensive disappointment. She heard the scrape of a match. The scrape of the match was the sound of a closing door. Then came the whoosh. A wall of yellow flame erupted, climbing the kerosene-soaked boards. Smoke, thick and acrid, punched into the small shed, stealing the air, burning their eyes. The back, Eli roared, his voice cracking. He grabbed Clara, shoving her toward the far wall, away from the barred door. The old wood, it's rotten. He was still too weak, his ribs on fire, his body broken. He slammed his shoulder against the back wall, but the wood held. He grunted in agony and slumped. Clara screamed, pounding on the door. Alden, you will not! You will not! A neat tragedy, Alden's voice replied, calm, distant, already moving away. The gun, Eli gasped, coughing, his hand on his chest. Clara, the gun! She had it. It was in her hand. The cold, heavy steel a terrible comfort. Point where? She screamed, the smoke clawing at her throat. The bar, the lock, just shoot! She turned. The front of the shed was a curtain of fire. She could see the heavy wooden bar, silhouetted against the flames. She raised the revolver with both hands, her body shaking so hard she could barely aim. She remembered his words. Point and pull. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the tiny space. The recoil slammed her back against the wall. The bullet splintered wood, but the bar held. Again, Eli yelled. She fired again. A chunk of the door jamb flew off. The bar sagged. Fire! The scream was not hers. It was Tim's. Fire in the yard! Fire! Outside, Alden's smooth plan was turning to ash. The ranch hands, not all gone, delayed by a missing horse, heard the shot, they heard the scream, they saw the woodshed, the one behind the bunkhouse, engulfed in flame. They came running. Clara fired a third time. The bullet struck the metal bracket. With a screech, the bar, weakened, half burned, crashed down. Eli, finding a last, desperate reserve of strength, kicked the door. It burst open, a rectangle of fire, smoke, and screaming men. Clara fell out, landing on her hands and knees in the snow, gulping at the clean, frozen air. Eli tumbled after her, a smoking, bloody heap. Alden stood, frozen, his face a mask of pure, murderous disbelief. His men were there, 4, 5 of them, staring, buckets in hand. Alden began, his voice shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it choked him. He had to pivot. He had to reclaim the narrative. He went mad. Boone, he locked my wife in the shed. He tried to kill her. He set the fire. The men looked at Alden. They looked at Eli, barely conscious. They looked at Clara, her face black with soot, her hand still clutching the revolver. Pike and Brody. Alden's inner circle. Moved first. Get her, Alden snarled. Brody grabbed Clara. She was too weak to fight. He ripped the gun from her grasp and hauled her to her feet, his fingers digging into her arm. No, she whispered. No. She was dragged, like a sack of grain. Across the yard, the men, their loyalty bought with Alden's silver, looked away. She was pulled past the grand porch, through the kitchen, her boots scraping the clean floor. Not her room. Alden's voice, cold and precise, followed. She is hysterical. She is a danger to herself. The root cellar. Lock her in, until she regains her senses. She was dragged to the back of the house, to the heavy, angled doors set into the earth. Martha stood there, her face a pale, horrified mask. She held the keys. "Martha, no!" Clara pleaded. Martha would not meet her eyes. She unlocked the heavy padlock. Brody shoved Clara in. She fell, tumbling down 5 wooden steps, landing hard on the cold, damp earth floor. The door slammed shut. The bar dropped. The padlock clicked. She was in the dark, cold. It smelled of potatoes, damp soil, and despair. Outside, in the yard, Alden turned his attention to the man he truly hated. "You are fired," he said, his voice quiet, for Eli's ears alone. The other hands had gone to put out the last of the fire. Only Brody and Pike remained. Eli, on his knees in the snow, his body a mass of new burns and old bruises, looked up. He spat a mouthful of blood and smoke. "You are a coward," Eli breathed. Alden smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. "And you are a dead man who forgot to lie down. I told you, Mr. Boone, I do not lose. You lost her," Eli whispered. Alden's face went white. The smile vanished. Brody, his work with Clara done, stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. This is just for pleasure, boss." Alden turned his back. "I want him off my land. I do not care how he gets there. I just want him gone." Brody's first kick snapped Eli's already broken ribs. The second, to the face, sent him into the dark. But the ranch was uneasy. The hands who had returned from the half-started drive found a strange, toxic silence. The boss's wife was sick, locked away. The new hand, Boone, was gone. But Tim, the stable boy, had seen Brody and Pike throw him into a wagon, like a side of beef, and drive him to the property line, miles from town. The ranch was split. The older, loyal hands, men like Hatcher, the foreman, believed Alden. They saw a quiet, respectable man pushed too far by a conniving woman and a rough drifter. But the younger hands, the ones who had seen the look in Pike's eyes, the ones who had seen Clara's pale, haunted face, they whispered. Tim, brave and terrified, told his story to 2 of them. He told them about the woodshed, the lock, the kerosene. He tried to kill them both. Tim whispered in the bunkhouse, his voice shaking. "Shut your mouth, boy," a grizzled older hand said. "The boss's business ain't yours. You want to keep your job, you keep your head down." But the seed was planted. Eli Boone was not a drifter. He was a man. And Mrs. Whitmore, she was not a harlot. She was a prisoner. Clara lived in the dark for 3 days. The cold was a living thing. It seeped into her bones until she could no longer feel her feet. Twice a day, the door would open. A rectangle of blinding, gray light. Martha would place a bucket of water and a piece of stale bread on the top step, her face impassive. "Martha, please," Clara begged on the second day, her voice a raw croak. "You know this is wrong. You saw him?" Martha looked at her. For one moment, the mask slipped. Clara saw fear. Fear of Alden. Fear of being old and alone and out of a job. "Eat, ma'am," Martha said, and closed the door. Clara huddled in her cloak, the one she had been wearing. It smelled of smoke, of Eli, of life. She ate the bread, forcing it down. She would not starve. She would not die in this hole. On the third night, she heard a sound. Not the heavy, certain step of Martha, a lighter, hesitant scrape. The slat in the door, the one used for ventilation, slid open. "Ma'am?" A different voice. Mary, the young maid, the one who had brushed her hair. "Mary," Clara whispered, scrambling to the door. "Mary, thank God. I cannot," Mary whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I'm so afraid, but I saw him in the hall. After he hit you, I saw his face, and I saw my father before he... She did not need to finish. "He will come for me," Clara said, her voice urgent. "He will not let me live. Mary, he cannot. I know too much. I know." Mary wept. She shoved something through the slat. It was hard and wrapped in cloth. It's a knife from the kitchen, and bread and cheese. The door, Mary, the lock." "I cannot," she said, her voice breaking. Martha, she keeps the key on her. She sleeps with it. But the outside door, the one to the yard, it's old. The hinges..." Clara's hand closed on the knife. It was a paring knife, small, but the steel was real. "Go," Clara said. "Go, before she finds you." "Godspeed, ma'am," Mary whispered, and she was gone. Clara did not wait. She did not eat. She went to the outer cellar doors, the ones she had been thrown through. They were barred from the outside, but they were also padlocked. But they were old. 2 heavy planks of wood, set on 3 massive, rusty strap hinges. She worked, not at the lock, but at the hinges. The wood around them was soft, damp, and half-rotted. She jammed the knife in, prying, twisting, digging. She worked until her hands were raw, until her fingers bled. The knife blade, not meant for this, snapped. She was left with a 2-inch shard of steel. She kept digging. For hours. The moon rose high and cold, its light shining through the ventilation slat. She worked, sobbing with effort and rage. The wood splintered. It gave. She got her fingers under the hinge. She pulled. A nail screeched. She broke the wood around the bottom hinge, then the middle. The door was held only by the top hinge and the heavy bar. She put her shoulder to the door and pushed. It gave an inch. She pushed again. The rotten wood groaned, cracked, and then, with a sound like a pistol shot, the top hinge ripped free from the frame. The heavy door, no longer held, sagged and fell inward, crashing down the steps, missing her by inches. A triangle of night sky, brilliant with stars, opened above her. She was free. She scrambled up the steps, her body a single, screaming ache. She was starving, freezing, and half mad. She stood in the yard. The house was dark. The bunkhouse was dark. The world was asleep. She did not run south. She did not run to town. She ran to his cabin. It was a mile. She fell, her legs weak, her ankle, the one she'd hurt before, giving way. She got up, she limped, she crawled, she ran. The snow was deep, but she did not feel the cold. She was burning. She reached the cabin. It was dark, empty. "No," she panted. "No." She fell against the door, pushing it open. "Eli," she whispered into the blackness. She collapsed in the doorway, her body finally giving out. The cold earth. She had escaped one hole for another. She woke to warmth. She was not on the floor. She was on the cot, and he was there, sitting by the stove, his face illuminated by the low fire. He was a ruin. His face was a map of purple and black. His arm was in a makeshift sling, but he was alive. He had found her, a heap of snow and desperation in his doorway. He had carried her in, to his bed, and covered her with his own blanket. "Clara," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He held out a tin cup. "Broth, Tim. He's been bringing—" She took it. The hot, salty liquid was the best thing she had ever tasted. She drank, and she cried. He held her through the night. Not as a lover, but as a survivor. He held her while she shook, while the cold of the cellar left her bones. He held her, and he listened, and his face, what she could see of it, became a thing of carved stone. He will not stop," she whispered. "No," Eli said. He stood, his body aching. "No, he won't, so we stop him. How? He owns the law. He owns everything. Not everyone," Eli said. "The judge is his friend, but the town is just people. They fear him, but they do not love him." He found his coat. He was still in agony, but his eyes were clear. "We ride now. We ride to town. We go to the judge. We make it public. It's the only way." They rode. He had one horse, his own, which Tim had saved and hidden. Eli was too weak to ride alone, his ribs a constant fire. Clara, strong from rage, rode, and he sat behind her, his arms around her waist, his body a dead weight, his gun, the one Tim had also saved, in his belt. They rode through the dawn. The 40 miles were a blur of pain and snow. They reached the town, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled against the cold. Just after noon, they left the horse, half dead, at the livery. The judge, he's at the saloon, the Golden Nugget." Eli panted, leaning on her. They walked in. The saloon went silent. The music from the tinny piano stopped. Miners, ranchers, shopkeepers. They all turned. They saw a woman, dressed in a filthy, torn dress, her hair a wild mat, her face bruised. And they saw Eli Boone, a man who looked like he had been kicked to death by a horse, holding on to her. "Judge Miller," Clara said, her voice loud in the silence. A man in a clean suit, his face pink, his white mustache stained with whiskey, looked up from his cards. "Ma'am," he said, annoyed. "I am Clara Whitmore, my husband, Alden Whitmore. He has tried to murder me." The judge's face hardened. He stood, wiping his mouth. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are clearly unwell. You have been abducted by this man. Sheriff," he called, to a man with a heavy badge. "Take Mrs. Whitmore into your protection and arrest this man." "No," Eli said, pulling his gun. The room exploded in motion. Men dived for tables. "Don't touch her," Eli said, his voice low, but the gun did not waver. "Boone, put it down," the sheriff said, his hand on his own gun. Don't make this worse. Clara, my dear." The voice came from the doorway. Alden. He was here. He must have seen them ride, or been telegraphed. He stood, his fine wool coat brushed, his face a mask of pained concern. This terrible ordeal," Alden said, walking into the room. "It is over. This criminal has filled your head with lies. Come home." He reached for her arm. Eli thumbed back the hammer. I said, no." "A shootout. In my saloon. the owner yelled. "Hold on, hold on," the sheriff said, stepping between them. His hands up. "Everyone, just calm down." He is lying," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Of course he is, my dear," Alden said, his voice slick. "He is a common drifter. You are my wife. You are confused." And that was the word that broke her. Confused. She stepped out from behind Eli. She stepped into the middle of the room. She was no longer shaking. "No," she said, her voice clear, ringing in the still, smoky air. "I am not confused. I am free." She turned, not to Alden, not to Eli, but to the crowd, to the miners, the shopkeepers, the other ranchers. "My husband," she said, her voice strong. "Alden Whitmore. He bought me. He hit me." She pointed to her face. He locked me in a cellar for 3 days. "Lies," the judge sputtered. "Is this a lie?" Clara screamed. She ripped the high collar of her dress. The old, yellowing, purple bruises on her collarbone, from his shove weeks ago, were visible to everyone. The room gasped. "He tried to burn us alive," she said, her voice dropping, but carrying. "He locked us in a shed, and he set it on fire. This man," she pointed to Eli, "saved my life, and this man," she pointed to Alden, "tried to end it, because I would not be his property." Her voice shook, but it did not break. "I am not a piece of land. I am not one of his cattle. My name is Clara." Silence. Alden's face was white. He was not a murderer. Here, he was a bully, a wife-beater. He was shamed. In public, the crowd, which had feared him, which had respected his money, slowly, almost as one, turned against him. They saw their own wives, their daughters. They saw a brute, the sheriff, a practical man, saw the wind change. He did not care about the law. He cared about the peace. He turned to Alden. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice flat. I think you are not welcome in this town. Not today. Not for a long while." This is slander," Alden hissed, looking to the judge. The judge just looked at his cards. "I think," the sheriff said, his hand now on his gun, "you should leave, or I will. I will have to arrest you for disturbing the peace." Alden Witt's eyes, cold and full of hate, swept the room. They rested on Clara. It was a promise of murder, but he was beaten. He turned, his back stiff, and he walked out of the saloon. He had lost. The saloon was a tomb. The silence that followed Alden's departure was heavier, thicker, than the one that had followed their entrance. Eli, his hand still on the revolver, finally let his arm drop. The gun felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He swayed, the adrenaline and the blood loss catching up to him. Clara moved, her mind clear, her voice steady. "Sheriff, he needs a doctor." The sheriff, his face pale, cleared his throat. He looked at Clara, at the bruises, at the torn dress, and he saw not a harlot, but a woman who had won a war. "Yes, ma'am, Doctor Hayes, he's 2 doors down." The town, its conscience pricked, moved. The saloon owner, who had just been yelling about a shootout, brought a bottle of his best whiskey. For the pain," he stammered. "A woman, the saloon keeper's wife, a hard-faced woman named Sadie, came from the back. She had seen Clara's face, heard her voice. She had seen her own husband in Alden's eyes. She put a thick wool shawl around Clara's shoulders. You'll stay at my boarding house," she said. It was not a request. On the house. They were given refuge. The doctor, a young, tired man, stitched the gash on Eli's head, his face grim. He's got broken ribs, a lot of them. He should be in a bed for a month." "He will be," Clara said. Sadie gave them her best room, the one at the back of the hall, the one with a window that overlooked a quiet, snow-filled alley. It had a bed, a chair, and a pitcher of clean water. And it had a key that locked from the inside. That night, Eli, full of laudanum from the doctor, fell into a deep, agonizing sleep. Clara sat in the chair, the knife Mary had given her, which she had somehow kept, on her lap. She watched the door. She did not sleep. She watched, and she waited for Alden's footsteps, but no footsteps came. The town, having turned, had turned completely. The sheriff, perhaps to save his own skin, had posted a deputy at the end of the street. Alden Whitmore was gone. The sun rose. Eli was still breathing, his face a swollen wreck, but he was breathing. The light, pale and clean, filled the small room. Clara looked at the lock on her door. She looked at the quiet alley. She went to the bed. She lay down, on top of the covers, her hand still on her knife, and for the first time in years, she slept. It was not a sleep of exhaustion. It was a sleep of peace. There were no nightmares, no cold rooms, no silent husbands. She slept deeply, and she woke to the smell of coffee. It was dusk. She had slept the entire day. Eli was awake. He was sitting up in the bed, his back against the headboard, his face a mask of purple and yellow. He looked terrible, and he was smiling, a faint, pained stretching of his split lips. You snore," he whispered, his voice a rasp. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. A laugh, a real, rusty sound escaped her. It hurt her throat. "I do not." "You do," he said. He gestured to the chair. Sadie had left a tray. Coffee, thick beef stew. She sat, her body aching, her mind clear. They ate in silence. The stew was hot, the coffee bitter. It was life. He looked at her, his one good eye clear. He's gone." "Yes." What will you do, Clara?" She looked around the small, safe room. She thought of the grand house, of the cold study, of the dark cellar. She thought of her father, of Alden, of the men who had owned her. She looked at Eli. I do not know. I have nothing. I am just me. That is everything," he said, his hand finding hers on the blanket. His hand was rough, calloused, and warm. He held on, as if she were the anchor. What do you want?" "Next?" She thought for a long time. She looked at her hands, raw from the cellar, clean now. What did she want? Revenge, justice. She had gotten as much of that as the world would give. Money? It meant nothing. She looked at him. "To live," she said, her voice quiet, but fierce. "Just to live." He squeezed her hand. "South, then," he said. We go south, until no one knows our names." They stayed in the town for a week. Eli healed, his body, used to abuse, knitting itself back together with a stubborn, frontier toughness. Clara's bruises faded. Sadie, the boarding house owner, refused any money. You did what none of us could, child," she said, her hard eyes wet. You spoke up." The town gave them a new start. The sheriff, his guilt heavy, confiscated 2 of Alden's horses, which had been left at the livery. He gave them to Eli. Payment for services. He'd muttered. They had 2 horses, a new, sturdy saddle for Clara, and $20, a collection taken up in the saloon. They rode south. They did not look back. They rode out of Wyoming, out of the high, cold plains. They rode for weeks, sleeping under the stars, Eli's arm around her, his gun by his side. They rode until the snow turned to mud, and the mud turned to grass. They rode until the gray plains gave way to the sharp, blue peaks of the Colorado mountains. They found a small valley, a place with a name, but a place no one much bothered with. It was far from the railroads, far from the cattle barons. It was a place of small farms, of families who had come for the high, clean air. They rode into the small, one-street town, and no one knew them. They were just 2 more people, scarred by the trail. Eli, his body still aching, found work. He found it with his hands, a rancher, A man named McPherson had a string of wild horses, broomtails, that no one could break. Eli, his voice quiet, his movements slow, went into the corral. He did not use Brody's methods. He did not use a whip. He used his voice and his hands, and a patience that seemed as old as the mountains. He broke horses, not by breaking their spirit, by earning their trust. Clara, too, found work. She had her education. The valley had children. She started a school. It was not a grand building. It was a corner of McPherson's barn. And then, when the winter came, a room in the back of the general store. She taught 7 children, their letters, their numbers. She read to them from the one tattered book of poetry she had bought with her first dollar. Their life was hard. They rented a small, one-room cabin, no bigger than Eli's old trapper's shack. It was cold. They were poor, but the air was their own. One night, Eli came home, his shoulder aching from a horse that had fought him. Clara was by the fire, her hands red from washing. She was staring into the flames. He will come. One day, she whispered. Eli came up behind her. He put his hands on her shoulders. Yes, he said, maybe, and if he does. We are not in that shed. We are here, together. She leaned back against him. He was right. The fear was still there, a cold shadow in the corner, but it no longer owned the room. The winter passed. The deep mountain snow melted, and the valley bloomed. The creeks ran high. The air was sweet with pine and damp earth. One morning, Eli did not go to the ranch. He took her hand. Come. He took her up a small rise, a place that overlooked the valley, a stand of tall aspen trees, their leaves a pale, trembling green, stood by a creek. This, he said, this is ours. He had filed a claim, with the money from the horses, with the money she had earned. He had filed for 40 acres. It is not grand, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It is everything, she whispered. They built their house, with their own hands. Eli, with a quiet nod from McPherson, took his pay in timber. He cut the trees, hewed the logs. Clara, her hands no longer soft, chinked the walls with mud and straw. They built a porch. They built a fireplace, stone by stone, hauling the rocks from the creek bed. It was not a 3-story Victorian monster. It was 2 rooms, with a solid door, and a roof that did not leak. It was not a prison. It was a home. They still ached. They carried the past, like the scars on their skin. One night, a thunderstorm, loud as artillery, crashed through the valley. Clara woke, her heart hammering. Shiloh, Eli was muttering, his body rigid, his hands clenched. He was back in the war, his eyes wide and unseeing. Eli, she said, her voice calm, firm. She did not coddle him. She held his face. Eli, you are here. You are with me. It is just rain. He blinked, his eyes focusing on her. He saw her, and the terror receded. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. It sounded like the guns. I know, she said, holding him. I know. And when she woke, screaming, from a nightmare of smoke and a slamming door, of a cold cellar, he would be there. He would hold her, his strong, solid arms a wall around her. You are safe, he would whisper. Clara, I am here. You are safe. She bought paints, not fine oils, watercolors, in a cheap tin box, and paper. She sat on her porch, their porch, and she painted. She did not paint the bleak gray plains of Wyoming. She did not paint a prisoner's view. She painted the light. She painted the way the morning sun hit the high peaks, turning them rose and gold. She painted the bright, wild blue of a mountain jay. She painted the faces of the children, their eyes bright with learning. Her paintings were not hollow. They were full of a light so bright it almost hurt. Their passion did not dim. It had been born in the desperation of a hayloft, in the fear of a woodshed. Now, it deepened. It was no longer a desperate grasping. It was a a knowing. It was in the way he would stop, on his way to the horses, to watch her hang the laundry, a small smile on his face. It was in the way she would bring him a cup of water, her hand lingering on his shoulder. It was not a fire, it was an ember. Hot, deep, and constant. It was something holy, something real. One night they lay in their bed, the one he had built. The moonlight streamed in, not through a high loft door, but through their window. She was tracing the scar on his eyebrow, the one he had when she met him. I was thinking, she whispered into the quiet, about Philadelphia, about him. Eli went still, but he did not pull away. I thought I was in love, she said. I was a fool. I was so empty, and he read me poetry. She turned, her hand moving to his chest, to the solid, steady beat of his heart. And then there was Alden, and the silence, the cold. I was a ghost, a thing he owned. She propped herself up on her elbow, her hair falling around her face. She looked at him, at his scarred, beautiful, broken face. I was never really touched, she whispered, the words a confession, a truth so deep it ached. Not once. In my whole life, until you. Eli's eyes burned in the moonlight. He said nothing. Words were not his way. He leaned in, and he kissed her. He kissed her, slowly. A promise, a prayer. And then he moved. He kissed her throat. He kissed her shoulder. And he kissed her scars. He kissed the faint, white line on her collarbone, where the bruise from Alden had been the darkest. He kissed the puckered, angry red mark on her arm, where a burning ember had landed in the woodshed. He kissed the palm of her hand, the one she had ripped open in the cellar. He kissed them like they were prayers. He was not erasing her past. He was honoring her survival. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close, and he was home. The winter came again, high and hard, but the house was warm. The woodpile was high. They survived, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to hear from you. Please, let us know in the comments where you are listening from, and what you thought of Clara and Eli's journey. Your thoughts, in English, are what help us grow. And if you enjoyed this story, please be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you do not miss the next one.